Hi, my name's Emma and this is Rob, and we're here to welcome you to our first episode of Hope and the City.
Yeah, so we're here in Plymouth, and over the course of this series we're going to be talking about many real-life events, what it's like in a tough world when things are tough. What does hope look like in the midst of all of that? In this first episode, we're going to be focusing in on your story, and particularly over the last few years. Many of us as humans, we often think about what's the worst that can happen, or we worry about that. And for you, you lost your son, which I think many people would say, God, that really is the worst. And yet you found hope in the midst of that. So we're going to be talking about that. And for anyone listening, if it brings up anything for you, perhaps even more questions than answers, please feel free to interact with us. We have an email address, hope@crplymouth.co.uk, and on all the socials as well, at Hope and the City. Perhaps now, as much as ever, we need hope in various forms for various reasons. And we've both got stories of needing hope and experiencing hope despite what life can chuck at us, because life can be really tough.
Yeah, often we're in difficult situations, and when we're in the difficult situations, it's like, what's the worst that can happen?
Right.
So I'm sure in your lifetime there's been times when you've thought, what's the worst that can happen here?
Yeah, sometimes when nothing bad's going on. And that's just part of ruminating in your mind and like being awake late at night and thinking of all the disasters that can happen in your life, all the things that can go wrong.
Yeah.
And then sometimes it just does go wrong.
Yes. Yeah.
Like, regardless of whether we've been preparing for it or not. And they're the ones that just hit you like a bus. And so one of the things that we want to do this episode to start up with, so people can understand, I guess, a bit about your story particularly, is to say what, Emma, you know, in many respects, the worst did happen to you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Tell us a bit about that.
Okay. So as you know our family. We are family. You are a cousin of my husband.
I'm your husband's first cousin.
Yes. So you very much followed this journey, followed this story that we've been through. And I guess it started originally about 2016. I've got 3 children. My eldest is Tom, all grown up now. And Abby is my youngest, and she's 18 now. And in between that, I had James as well. And James is where this story really starts. Is in 2016, James grew and had this pain in his knee, and he developed a cancer. And for that year, the whole of 2016, he was treated. He had surgery, and then we had 4 years of very good health. Really, a lovely way of living. You know, we learned through that time of sickness, you know, what life's all about. Really, God had really spoken to us in that time, and really showed us what counts, what's really important.
What matters, it puts everything into perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we had this 4 years, and we pretty much thought it was fine now, because they tell you when you get to 5 years, you're out the woods, that's it, you're cured. And then it was during COVID, James's cancer returned, and he had a 2-year battle, and sadly they were unable to control the cancer anymore, and he passed away in 2022, which is not what we were hoping for. It was what we were, hoping against, really. All the time you're just hoping that he'll live, that he'll survive, that he'll get through it. And I think loss is so difficult, but I don't think you ever expect to lose your children.
And that's the worst that can happen.
Yeah.
I mean, for context, for people, I've got an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old.
Yeah.
And someone said, what's the worst thing that could happen, Rob? I would say losing our James or our Anna. Of course, my wife as well. I don't want to exclude people that I don't want to lose. But when people say, what's the worst that can happen? I think when you become a parent, I remember the day Anna being born, my first child, and watching a little chest going up and down in the crib that they put them in, and being terrified of leaving the hospital, because I thought, if I stop watching her, she'll stop breathing.
Yes. Yeah.
So the moment your first child comes into the world, you have a new set of fears.
Yes.
In some, that you didn't have before.
Well, there's a protective instinct as well, I think. There's something about that. I think I notice it sort of just in generations, actually, down to, I think with love, with your children, you pay it forward. I think our parents love us more than we love them, but not that we don't love them enough. And I think we love our children even more than they'll ever understand.
Right.
And perhaps love us, and it'll only be when they have their own children. I think
So
it's
rather than
okay,
reciprocating a parental love, you pass it on to your own children.
I
Now,
think so.
I guess what we're saying as well, we don't want to exclude people listening who say, well, I haven't got kids and therefore I can't. What we're not saying is you can't experience loss.
Yeah.
That we all have what's the worst that can happen. And perhaps over the weeks to come, we're not only going to talk about the massive, big, dramatic stuff because we need a hope that stands up to real life, don't we? And real life is sometimes extreme.
Yes.
And sometimes it's just about getting through the everyday.
Yeah.
But I think as an opener and for the hope that people will get to know us a little bit and that we're speaking in many sense from experience. Yeah. I can talk a bit about me. I think for me, mainly being in Plymouth, I've been involved in helping people through periods of grief or cancer or what have you. Yeah. People who don't know, I've been working in churches around Plymouth. So one of my jobs as a vicar, it's that people come to you in the hardest times of their life and funerals, etc. But let's just go back to your story. So you've told us how it began and how it ended, but leading up to that point, were you ever worried that you would lose a child? Was that just not being a parent when the kids were younger? Did you ever have that fear?
Yeah. I mean, I can remember, particularly when Tom was first a baby, when you were talking about early parenthood. And I think there was an element where, much like that, when he was in his Moses basket at the side of the bed, that if I stopped looking at him, he would stop breathing. Or if I didn't listen out, then something would happen to him. But I guess it's you settle into that, don't you? It's so new, this huge responsibility of having this child. But beyond that, I think it was the normal kind of scrapes and scuffs that kids have, and boys.
Oh, they're going to fall out of the tree.
Yeah, boys particularly. And our Tom is a little bit of a risk taker anyway, so he always had me on the edge of my seat. But so yes and no. And I think in order to be able to live every day, you do shut that out of your lives, don't you? You shut that out of your thoughts because you could almost be so consumed by fear of them being injured or removed or taken away that you wouldn't be able to function. So I think there's a mental, for me anyway, there was a mental way of actually parking that. And so it wasn't anything that I'd thought about. And I've got to say, when they first said the word cancer, that just blew my mind. I just...
Could you hear about it for other people? My 16-year-old, my James.
Yeah. And even that I can remember we went up to Click House, which is in Bristol, and it's the accommodation that you stay in while your child's having cancer treatment. And I can remember being there and thinking, we're in the wrong place. We're in the wrong place. Like, we don't belong here because this is for people whose kids are really sick. And that's not us. We're in the wrong place, you know? So I think there's an element of, like, we deny it. You know, when everything's okay, we deny it, that bad things do happen, you know, that difficult things do happen. So, it's not something I'd considered.
And when that first... So for James, the first time that cancer is mentioned, does regardless of where everyone's mind goes to, where does the conversation go to within the family straight away? Do you then just move on to the pragmatics of treatment or do you talk about how do we all feel about this? What happens in that moment and in the weeks?
Well, you remember James, he was a little bit of a jovial character and very always in for a quip and a funny comment or whatever. So I do remember saying to him, James, I can't believe that, as we were coming out of the hospital, I can't believe this is happening to you. I wish it was me. And he said, oh, Mum, don't be so ridiculous, you've got 3 children, you know. And that was just how he said it, you know what I mean? And like if I'm honest, I think because I did nursing before I had children, so when you hear the word cancer, you know that this is serious illness, that this is going to incur some serious operations or some, you know, heavy chemotherapy, and there's going to be a long journey to get through this. And I think James, in his 15-year-old kind of naive state, probably didn't realise how serious it was. They did talk very early on about amputating his leg, which initially didn't happen until many years later and almost towards the end of his life. And James, being James, was just like looking at blades and things that he could like buy, you know, with like Arsenal and things like that on, because he supported Arsenal. So he very much saw it as a bit of an adventure, I think. And there wasn't the fear there. Whereas I think for Carl and I, there was a lot more fear around it and anxiety around it. You know, maybe because he was carrying that burden himself. He often said, like later on, I think it's harder watching than doing it. I think when you're the person going through it, it's really hard. But when you're looking on, you feel so helpless.
So there's, in this story, I guess what I'm hearing is there's lots of different people trying to be strong for each other. There's James, regardless of his own diagnosis, being strong for his mum because he knows how his mum's going to worry, and his dad and his brother and sister. But then there's you and as mother, and I guess we don't want to speak for Carl because he's not in the room. But what does it feel like in those early days trying to be strong for everyone else? And where is, for people listening who are going through adversity, the worst hasn't yet happened, and we hope it never does for people. But when you're in the midst of a trial and there's other people in the mix, where do you get your space to process it? Or do you just have to trust that's going to come later? I have a primary role here. I'm a mum.
I think it's a bit of both, to be honest with you. So there's an element of you can put your big girl pants on and try and pull it together for the family, you know. So Tom at that time was 17 and I think Abby was 10, 11. So they were still quite young. So there's an element of you're trying not to let them see you upset and anxious, because if you go upset and anxious and they see mum and dad have fallen apart, then actually, is that going to make it worse for them? So there's an element of you are trying to, like, you know, be brave about it all and process it at the same time. So I guess really there was there were the times when we had to withdraw. I mean, we ended up spending quite a lot of time away from home. And so James would be at the hospital having whatever tests and Carl and I would be on our own. And I think that's the time when we did a lot of deep processing and a lot of deep sobbing, that we were in that situation.
With each other?
Yeah, with each other. And even like on our own, really. But I would say in all of that people surrounded us, and I've never recognised the value of other people, community, whatever that looks like to somebody. I would really encourage them to lean on their community around them, because you draw such strength. And
one of the ways you dealt with it, Emma, not dealt with it, but one of the things you decided as a family would be important, and I'm interested how much it was for your own benefit as well as you sharing hope, your hope despite circumstances. You started a blog.
Yes, yeah.
James 1 in a million.
Yeah, that was
James
it.
Marlowe 1 in a million. Yeah, wow. So tell us about that. So first of all, why did you do it?
Okay.
How much of it was for you and how much was for other? Bit of both.
Yeah. Well, we attend quite a large church, and because the kids had gone across different schools and things like that, it felt like we knew a lot of people, and a lot of people were asking, how are you getting on?
Yes, yeah.
And you know, like how Chinese whispers can go. And so we basically wanted always for people to have the right information and the same information. And that way it kind of cuts out any cross wires. So we set it up. It was a friend of mine, actually, years before, had a baby, and the baby was poorly when they were born, and they'd done a blog to keep everybody updated, and it was such a good idea. So I did that. So we set up a blog and started, just sort of saying how James was. And initially it started out like, whereas we might not have the opportunity to, like, say, phone yourself and just say, this is how things are. It just meant that people like yourself could go to the blog and know that's where
had
we're
this
at.
Appointment, had this letter.
Yeah. This is today's struggle.
Okay.
You know, we're in Bristol, we're in Birmingham, we're in Plymouth, whatever we're doing, you know, James is well, James is not so well, you know, that kind of thing. And it was a good way of keeping people up to date. But actually it turned into so much more than that.
It did. I mean,
I
used it, you know, I shared it with people who had no idea who James was. They'd never met you. They didn't know the family. Some people who weren't in Plymouth. And our hope, I guess, with this podcast, and I think it comes from this blog, actually, the more I think of it, is that you were prepared to get pretty real on the blog. It was more than just updates, wasn't it? It was also, and Carl posted, and occasionally the children would, as they were then, would contribute. James himself would give an update. So you're prepared to get quite real about stuff when you're going through it. Did that help?
It helped a lot, actually. So amazingly, it turned into like one of those things that did help us process. So it almost, you'd be told all this information by different doctors or updates or scan results or whatever. And you'd hear it and you'd like write it down and try to, and then you almost have to put it in an order in your head of how things are going to play out, how things look, and what what the future might look like. And actually having the blog really helped that. It almost helped to clarify your thoughts and just get them in a sense of order. So it turned into very therapeutic. But interestingly, the blog got shared. And so it went worldwide actually in the end. And when I think there was over 10,000 different people looking at it. And
that itself is saying to me, I guess a bit like this podcast, and we haven't shared with anyone else really how this podcast has come together, but we think there has been a string of circumstances
absolutely
beyond our control and our scheming that's meant that we're now sat in a room much quicker than we thought we would actually doing this podcast. But the reason behind it is because we know, A, through your personal experiences and other people feeling that they could come to you, me because of the job I've had in Plymouth, that actually people connected into the blog.
Yes.
A, because they cared about James and you. Yeah. But B, because they were going through stuff.
Yeah.
So if you've got people all around the world, they were in one sense emotionally invested, but in another sense, their real emotional investment was, I'm going through a really tough time. How is someone else doing it?
Yeah, absolutely. And even now, it was only a couple of weeks ago. So we're 2 years after James passed away. And we only did a few updates after he died, not really beyond the end of 2022. And I had an email the other day that was somebody in America whose teenage relative was going through the same cancer. And they said, can you do any more updates? And so it's still out there, this podcast. And
the blog.
The blog. Yeah. Sorry, the blog's still out there. And people are still going to it and looking to it. And, it was interesting because a number of people said, similarly to what you've just said, I knew somebody that was struggling, so I pointed them to the blog, because in that we were gritty, I think. We were really honest and said, this just feels awful. This just feels like it might destroy us. What we're really up against it here. But then in the same breath, there was but there is hope. There is an opportunity for hope here.
Your blog was shot through with hope. I mean, it was amazing how even when you were in the worst bits, and I don't know if you shared the worst bits. I don't know. Perhaps you can tell us, how bad it did get, how despairing you got. But at the end of it, you'd always post something that was, there was a but. And, one of the things I'll say is, more I speak to people in Plymouth, I hear the phrase, I'm not religious, but. Yeah. Now, at times, we're going to talk about our own personal faith in this podcast. Ultimately, we want to talk about real, raw, real life. Yeah. But hope is only hope if it stands up to real life, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
And you had a hope that held you.
Yes.
Because, one of the things I've really been dismayed by over the last few years, I guess, is on social media, when things are tough, more and more people will post a meme that translated sounds more like, you've got this. Yeah. Now, I think that's a great encouragement. You've got this. You can get through today. And I think for many people, just getting through the day, that's a huge success. Yeah. But the thing is, if all you hear is you've got this, but deep down inside, you really don't feel like you do. I wonder how much that phrase, you've got this, eventually feels like another burden in another sense and can add a feeling of failure that, I really appreciate being cheered on, but I really don't think I do. Yeah. Did you feel like I've got this to get through the day? Yeah. Or was it bigger than that?
No, I certainly didn't feel like I've got this. And almost the phrase, like you say, I've got this, does feel like people are cheering you on, which is amazing when you know that people are behind you and they're wanting you to do well. But it does also feel a little bit like a sticking plaster as well, because it's not really dealing with the deeper issue, do you know what I mean, of what's going on. It's great, and it is a huge encouragement. So I would say, keep telling people, you've got this, you're doing
great. Or you get through today or whatever
absolutely.
It is.
Yeah. I would say, no, don't stop telling people that. But there needs to be something deeper than that as well. There needs to be something that really does deal with whatever's going on.
And I think the depth that came from your blog wasn't that any particular words that you crafted, but it was the fact that over time, the evidence was, the story was that you guys will continue, you were keeping going. Yeah. Now, some people listening might say, well, of course you keep going, because what choice have you got as a mum? As you've got to get to the appointments, you've got to keep going.
Yeah.
But I imagine there were times where you really did hit rock bottom.
Yeah, where I would think, I just don't want to, I want to pull the duvet up over my head and for it all to go away. And particularly, I think, after James died, it was like, you know, we talked about or we've mentioned what's the worst that could happen. And for as long as we had James, it felt like we had hope. But when James had passed away, it was like, oh my goodness, you know, like what now? And, you know, I obviously, towards the last few weeks, I'd begun to think about what life might look like when he wasn't in it. But I was not prepared for how it felt emotionally to actually let go of a child and watch them take their last breath and go. And yeah, and there were times when I just wanted to pull the duvet right over my head and just wanted the world to go away, you know, really, really difficult. And the pain was so heavy that I was like, I don't know if I can carry on like this with this pain. You know, if I think I've got to live the rest of my life like this, I don't think I can face it. Yeah, I haven't got the strength to do it, you know.
And you have, in one sense, you do have to do the rest of your life like that. Mm-hmm. But life unfolds a day at a time, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So let's focus in, if you don't mind, I guess, around those last days.
Yes, yeah.
And going through that with James and with the family.
Yeah.
What was that like? It's a stupid question, but...
Yeah. No, so James, I mean, towards the end, we seem to have reached a plateau. So if I give you a little bit of background, really. So he had... he relapsed in 2020, and then in 2021, they told us that if he had his leg amputated, then he could be saved because they could get all of the cancer cells and have them removed. So he had his leg amputated up at the hip, which I think you remember. That it was just all gone, you know.
I mean, it was right up to the hip bone, wasn't it?
Joint, yeah. So all of that was gone.
And I mean, James was 6'4".
Yeah, 6'4". Yeah, massive. You know, just gangly and massive. Yeah. But he, excuse the pun, took it in his stride. He just completely...
He used to pun quite a lot, James, didn't he? Didn't find a bit of humour.
He did. He was very funny and stuff. But he was amazing how he came back from that. And of course, there was that hope. We were like, that's it. You know, he's paid this massive sacrifice. He's entered a life of disability now, but it's saved him. You know, it's saved his life and he will live now. And there was follow-up chemo, and then we found out the chemo hadn't worked. So that was another crash down. Then they said, we can try some trials now, different medication. Hasn't been used much for this type of cancer before, but where we have seen it, it's been really successful. So that was around the Christmas time of 2021. So in the January, he started this medication, and for 3-4 months, it really worked. And everything seemed to shrink down, and we were like, this is it. You know, he's going to be cured, or at least he's going to have a much longer life. And then I think it was around the Easter time, and they said, yeah, it's not looking so good now. We've seen some signs that there's growth again and the disease is advancing. And it was the July then, after that he was doing quite well. He carried on with the trial treatment, and it was in the July, and he said, they said, well, actually, James deteriorated quite a bit. And so he went to the hospital, and they said, actually, yeah, it's not looking good at all. This
is a roller coaster, isn't it?
Yeah, absolute roller coaster. And we knew at that point then that we were talking weeks or months, which when you think you've got years, it just feels like you're robbed continuously of things. You know, I go back to when James was first diagnosed and had chemotherapy, and then we were told James will never have children of his own now because of the treatment he'd had. So there's all these things that you're
lots of little griefs.
Yeah, lots of losses.
Sense? Lots of losses.
Lots of losses along the way. And the loss of, you know, I think about Tom and Abby, and actually this part of their lives was so overshadowed by cancer and the illness of their brother. And they were so full of grace, both of them, and so supportive and loving of him. But they didn't get to do those things that they should have done. They didn't get their parents' attention, you know, as they should have done. Abby finished year 6, you know, Tom was working, doing an apprenticeship, and actually they were robbed of our support in those times as much as we normally would have liked to have given them.
So there's hope in the sense of you're hoping that the worst isn't going to happen.
Yeah.
But there were concessions that you were prepared to make in, you know, anything's better than losing James.
Yeah, totally.
So the ultimate grief or the ultimate loss is the relationship. When you think that you're not, regardless of what shape James is in, regardless of his prospects, regardless of what dreams he might have in this life, and we believe there is more than this life. That's the ultimate hope. But it's then when it comes, that moment that you say goodbye.
Yeah, I mean, it was very quick for James. So he became poorly, but again, we were told it was like weeks or whatever. And then I think it was the Friday, and they said he became very short of breath. So we took him to the hospital, and that was when he became really ill. And they just said he needs to decide where he's going to be at the end now. And he'd always sort of said about being in a hospital or a hospice because he didn't want Abby, bless him, to see him go through. Still protecting the family. But we were at home, and he ended up being at home, and he had friends and things come in, and he just gradually deteriorated over that weekend till he faded away. And just there's something about watching someone take a final breath that 1 minute they're there, and then the next minute they're gone. And they're not there. And even though you look at them and their physical body's still there, they've gone. And I can't even put into words what that feels like. And I think only people who've been there, regardless of whether that's a parent, a brother, sister, whoever it is, there's only that point where you just realise what physical death actually is. It's just, it's beyond words, really. I mean, I was sharing with you before we were talking that my mum passed away earlier this year, and again being with her like in those final hours as well, there's that point where she stopped breathing, and it's 1 minute she's there in that final breath, and then she's gone. And it's just the ultimate, isn't it? It just rubs the wrong way.
It feels so final.
And it feels so wrong. It just feels so wrong. Death feels so wrong, doesn't it? It goes against everything inside of us, I think.
So how... I have so many questions.
Go for
Luckily,
it.
we have more than one episode.
Yeah.
And we're not only going to talk about your experience with James, we're going to talk about other things, but this is your personal experience. I mean, one of the things you shared at the funeral was that James had humour up until the end.
Yes.
His last words to you is, "Mum, let's not make a big deal of this."
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he was, he was a teenage boy. So like in those 4 years when he was well, he went out and did the partying and did everything.
Kept you worrying in every way that
absolutely. Like driving his car, he was a little bit kamikaze in the car. And
specially designed car.
Yeah. Well, he had a normal car to begin with, and then when he had his leg amputated, he had a Motability car. And so it was an automatic, and they because he had his right leg amputated, so they put the accelerator and brake on the flip side, so he controlled it with his left leg. So he did, but he was like very like you can like, James, watch the road, and too fast, and all the other things that boys are like when they're teenagers. So he did have a great sense of humour. But in those final days, I think Dave Beresford, our pastor, came round and chatted, and James had wanted to be baptised, and he hadn't been baptised at that point. And he said, what happens if I don't get a chance to be baptised? And Dave just said, God knows your heart, James. He knows your heart. And in that, I think James felt comfortable about where he was going. He prayed. And I can remember that we were praying with him, like in that final weekend, really. And James had his arms out, and he just knew that there was so much more than this physical life. And I have to be honest, I think for us as a family, that has been so much of our hope, that this isn't it. There's not a finality. I mean, I think during the whole experience, the whole 6 years, God was planting that seed of eternal hope in our hearts. There was that
you read about it in church, you talk about it, but there's a different living hope
of eternity. And actually that it's not an abstract thought.
It's not a knowing up there.
It's a knowing. And that's it. And just that. And even I talk about Mum and I talk about James taking their final breath, but there seems like something where you can see them slipping almost into eternity. So while it's really hard to watch on our side, and oh my goodness, the pain of watching people go and then not having them there to receive the love that you've got for them, but actually knowing that they've gone to an eternity where we'll see again, we'll meet them again, and they're restored and they're free from all this pain and suffering, on the earth now. So, yeah, I think that's the hope.
And it makes all the difference.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it doesn't
take away the pain.
It takes the sting, maybe?
Well, I would say it gives you a hope, and it says, doesn't it, biblically, we grieve not as the world grieves. I think there is something else, isn't there, that because we're aware of eternity, I can't say it takes the sting out, but I would say it gives you a hope so that you can live each day. And actually, the pain that you live in each day, it's temporary.
Wow.
So that's the best way I think I could describe it.
So you feel your hope. So if we want to talk about your faith now, your hope is not something that makes you immune from feeling the full force that everybody else feels in loss.
Absolutely.
Or even in another sense, you feel the full force of it.
Yeah.
But like going back to what we said before, hope's only hope if it stands up to real life. And there's nothing more real than death, is there? It's the 100% statistic that all of us are going to face.
Yeah.
So your hope stood up to the full force of engaging with the loss of a son.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that hope ultimately was not just a set of beliefs in your mind, but a supernatural force. That gave you, I don't know. I mean, did you only feel sadness for weeks and weeks?
I think there's an initial numbness, and I think there's a lot of disbelief. I think there was a lot of in those initial early days, there's a lot of disbelief that it's actually happened. You can't believe that this is it, and even now, I'll think about James and I'll think, I can't believe I'm not going to hear his voice again. I can't believe I'm not going to get to touch his skin again or just have him near me. It's a really strange thing. So there's a disbelief, I think, that the permanence of death, it feels like they've gone away for a while. From my own personal experience, different people have different experiences, but certainly the disbelief that it had happened. But then there's all this inside you, all the mum stuff and all that love with nowhere for it to go. So you've still got all your half of the stuff, but just nowhere to channel it, nowhere to put it because that person's gone. It's the only best way, I think, to describe it. And what do you do with that? You're left holding it and not knowing where to put it. And it was just numbness, I think, with that. You can't even, I couldn't even function at home, to cook a meal or something like that. Just seemed to ask too much, to talk to somebody it just seemed huge. And meanwhile, you're then expected to make all these big decisions, about arrangements for celebrations and funerals and all that kind of thing. But your head is just completely scrambled because your heart can't believe what your head has seen, what your eyes have seen. It's like your heart has to catch up with what's actually happened. But it's so rip-roaringly painful that it takes a while for that to happen.
Many people will be listening and thinking, thank you, Emma, for sharing so really and hopefully in the sense that this is the worst that people fear, and yet Emma is feeling brave enough to share the story. Not even 2 years, 2 years on, and over the weeks to come, I think we can go a bit deeper into different areas of the grieving process. But as we come towards the end of our opening episode, if you like, and people are listening, and you wanted to leave them with something, given that, who knows, we might do a podcast a week or something like that. They've now got to get through the next 6 days, and they're either in the midst of those worst fears, somebody they love is on their deathbed, or could be someone they lost 20 years ago, but don't feel that they've, I don't know the process of grief like you do. What would you say today?
What would I say? Well, I would say it's hour by hour. And I'd say to be kind to themselves. I really would say that. There's expectations. The world puts expectations. You're expected to feel like this. You're expected to respond like that. You're expected to be that person. And actually, sometimes you just need to be you. And you just need to allow yourself space be that, and not to be afraid to feel sad and to let yourself feel sad and process those emotions. Often we run from them, don't we? We put a lid on things, and we're so busy doing that we don't stop to feel things. And I think the feeling is so important.
And is there a sense that somebody might not allow themselves to feel sad because they think that by being sad, they're admitting defeat to death and not allowing the hope to come in? But if anything comes through from what you're saying, is actually you can have full sadness and full hope alongside one another.
Absolutely. And also draw on people around you. I would say draw on people around you. Our biggest experience was that sense of community. And I think I probably was a little bit prideful before Rob. I think before James was ever ill, I was probably a little bit like, I'm okay. I'd much rather be helping other people than having other people help me, because that meant I had to show my weakness, and to not be afraid to show the weakness and absolutely let that community of people around you, whoever it is, whether it's family, friends, neighbours, work colleagues, whatever, let them help you and hold you through that.
That's really helpful. Well, we don't know where this is going to go.
No.
Our conversation. We want to say there's hope.
Yes.
And be those people that say there is hope.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So James has gone. He's not with you physically now.
No.
But you have eternal hope.
Yes.
For James.
Yeah, absolutely. And the peace of knowing where he is and that he's okay. And actually he's better. He's fine. It's us, but he's restored. He's free from pain and suffering.
And that's not just a thing we say to one another. This is real. No, and I could say that to you, and I would want to say that to everybody, but this is something that's now dropped from, you have a journey in the church, haven't you? And you've been hearing for years of stuff, but this has now moved from a head thing to now I supernaturally know that the God who made the universe has one day at a time carried us through this. He's always been with us, and perhaps you're now more aware of his presence than ever.
Yeah, I would say so.
And that's your confirmation for you, your assurance that James is in a better place, that you will be united, and all these things that people, I think even in this day and age, they say to one another. I've been out in the neighbourhoods, Whitley and various places in Plymouth for a long time, and people often talk about heavenly anniversaries, heavenly birthdays, and so people are aware of it. But I think what we're just trying to say is, don't ever believe these are just words. This is hope. There is hope.
Absolutely. Rob, it's been so lovely to be able to talk about James with you again. It's always lovely. It always makes him feel that bit closer when I mention his name and when I talk about him. And I just want to thank you for enabling me to share and share our story as well. And I'm looking forward to hearing more about yours as well in the weeks to come. Thanks for joining us for this episode of Hope and the City. We hope you found it useful, and we're really glad that you've joined us. It would be great if you have any comments, any feedback, questions, or anything that you'd like us to look into in the future. If you get in touch on
hope@crplymouth.co.uk. Actually, we're thinking about doing a whole episode dedicated to people's questions and responses to some of the things that have come up. So do interact with us. I've given the email, and on the socials as well, @Hope and the City podcast. Thank you again for listening.